Welcome back to night 2 of our 2-night special covering the life of Joseph Carey Merrick, the Elephant Man. And with Joseph installed up in the isolation room in the hospital's attic, the problem or question then arose of what was to happen to Joseph in the long term. What you have to understand at the time is that the London hospital was not a permanent care facility and didn't take in incurable cases, but emotions were running high, and it was pretty much decided and thought upon that the poor man shouldn't be once again put out into the world to either be shoved from pillar to post or to become a travelling freak show attraction again. And that's where this lovely old gent comes into place. Francis Cargom, and he was chairman of the London Hospitals Committee, and he wrote a detailed letter to the Times newspaper, which was printed on the 4th of December 1886, and in it he outlined Joseph's case and appealed for public donations. Now the great British public did not disappoint, and so many donations came flooding in that it was happened upon that enough money, and more than enough money, was put aside to make Joseph's stay at the London hospital become a permanent one. Here's another such article published in the Stamford Mercury on the 10th of December 1886. So with enough money come in, it was decided that the London hospital would become Joseph's permanent home, and that a place of safety and refuge would be constructed for him there. So he was taken down from his isolation room up in the hospital's attic and moved to a basement area into 2 rooms that had been specially adapted for him. And where the arrow points, this is Joseph's former rooms, and they look out onto what was Bedstead Square. Bedstead Square so named because once a year all the beds would be taken out from the hospital and deloused and repainted in this square, and this would become Joseph's permanent home. And it was at this time that this photograph was taken of Joseph in the hospital, and as you can see from his fine suit that he's wearing and the lovely pocket watch he wears at his waist, which was a gift from one of his new friends and benefactors, he was very much well cared for in the hospital. And with Joseph Merrick admitted into the hospital and now given a permanent home, Frederick Treves now had time to conduct a more thorough examination. He discovered that Joseph's physical condition had deteriorated over the previous 2 years, and that he had become far more impaired by his deformities. Treves also suspected that Joseph had a heart condition and believed that he only had a few years left to live. Joseph's general health, however, improved over the next 5 months under the care of the hospital staff. Although some nurses were initially upset by his appearance, they were able to overcome this and take care of him under the guidance of the formidable hospital matron Eva Lucas, who we see here. The problem, which was a problem with Joseph, of his unpleasant odour, was mitigated through frequent bathing. The unpleasant odour arose through the pendulous flaps of skin that had grown and needed to be lifted and cleaned and washed regularly. One major rule, which was rigorously imposed by Frederick Treves and matron Lucas once Joseph was installed in his new permanent home, that no mirror was ever to be taken into Joseph's presence for obvious reasons. Treves gradually developed an understanding of his speech and was forced to re-evaluate his opinion that he'd had when he first saw Joseph in that awful shop along the Whitechapel Road, that rather than being an imbecile, Joseph was in fact a very clever and deeply sensitive young man. Joseph had spent his entire adult life segregated away from women, first in the workhouse and then as an exhibit. The women he had met were either disgusted or frightened by his appearance. His opinions about women were derived from his memories of his mother and what he had read in books. Treves decided that Joseph would like to be introduced to a woman, and that it would help him to feel normal. The doctor arranged for a friend of his named Mrs. Leila Maturin, a young and pretty widow, to visit Joseph, and she agreed. Having been given fair warning about Joseph's appearance, she went to his rooms for an introduction. The meeting was short, as Joseph was quickly overcome with emotion. He later told Treves that Mrs. Maturin had been the first woman in his adult life to ever smile at him and to first shake his hand. She kept in contact with him, and a letter written by Joseph to her thanking her for the gift of a book and a brace of grouse is the only surviving letter written by Joseph Merrick. He met other women during his life at the hospital and appeared quite taken with them all. Treves believed that Joseph's hope was to one day live at an institute for the blind, where he might meet a woman who couldn't see his deformities. Poor fella. It's heartbreaking when you consider the life that he led. As a result of Cargom's letter to the Times, Joseph Merrick's case attracted notice of London's higher society. One such person who took a keen and loving interest was actress Madge Kendall. She was responsible for raising funds and public sympathy for Joseph. She sent him autographs of herself and photos, books, and cardboard models for him to construct, like this one here. She also employed a basket weaver to go to his rooms to teach him the craft. Other people of high society also visited him, bringing him gifts of photographs and books. He reciprocated with letters and handmade gifts of card models and baskets. Joseph enjoyed these visits and became confident enough to converse with people who passed his windows. And here's the original photograph of Joseph Carey Merrick. Joseph Merrick wanted to know about the real world and questioned Treves on a number of topics. On one occasion, he expressed a desire to see inside what he considered to be a real house, and Treves obliged, taking him to visit his Wimpole Street home, his townhouse, and to meet his wife. Here's Dr. Frederick Treves' home. And here's a photo taken from the film Joseph, the Elephant Man, of Joseph Carey Merrick meeting Dr. Frederick Treves' wife, Anne Elizabeth. At the hospital, Joseph spent his days reading, constructing models of buildings out of card, and he entertained visits from Treves and his house surgeons. He rose each day in the afternoon and would leave his rooms to walk in the small adjacent Bedstead Square in the evenings. On the 21st of May 1887, new buildings were completed at the hospital, and the then Prince and Princess of Wales came to open them officially. The Princess wished to meet Joseph Merrick, so after the tour of the hospital, the royal party went to his rooms for an introduction. Princess Alexandra, who would become Queen Alexandra alongside her husband, who would become King Edward VII. They went to his rooms to meet him, and Princess Alexandra shook his hand and sat with him, an experience that left him overjoyed. She gave him a signed photograph of herself, which became one of Joseph's prized possessions, and she sent him a Christmas card after that each year. On at least one occasion, Joseph was able to fulfill a long-held desire to visit the theatre. Frederick Treves, with the help of Madge Kendall, arranged for him to attend a Christmas pantomime at the Theatre Royal, Drury Lane. Joseph Merrick sat with some nurses in front of him to conceal him from the crowds, in Lady Burdett Coutts' private box. According to Treves, Joseph was awed and enthralled at the spectacle, and it left him speechless, so that if he was spoken to, he would take no notice. He talked about the pantomime for weeks afterwards, reliving the story as if it had been real to him. Joseph was known to have a very active and lively imagination, which had been starved for so many years, so you can imagine this sensory overload and act of kindness and how it felt to him. On 3 occasions, Joseph Merrick left the London hospital to go on holiday, spending a few weeks at each time in the countryside. By means of elaborate arrangements that allowed him to board a train unseen and to have an entire carriage to himself, Joseph travelled to Northamptonshire to stay at Fawsley Hall, which we see here in 1908. Fawsley Hall was the estate of Lady Knightley, who we see here, and she was another one of Joseph's friendly benefactors who had helped arrange his holidays for him. This is the Dower House at Fawsley Hall, which is on the grounds. It was a ruin in the 1920s, as we can see, and it is a ruin still today. And it's likely that Joseph would have walked past this building on his ramblings and walks through the estate. Fawsley Hall again. Looks a lovely old building, doesn't it? And this is Fawsley Hall today, which is currently a luxury hotel complex where, if you wish, you can go and stay yourself. He stayed at the gamekeeper's cottage, which you can see here. And he spent his days walking in the estate's woods, Badby Wood, where Joseph took his walks, collecting wildflowers. He befriended a young farm labourer while on his holiday, who later recalled Joseph as an interesting and well-educated man. Frederick Treves called this the one supreme holiday of Joseph Merrick's life, although in fact there were 3 such trips there. Joseph Merrick's condition gradually deteriorated during the course of his 4 years at the London hospital, and he required a great deal of care from the nursing staff and spent much of his time in bed or sitting in his quarters. With diminishing energy, his facial deformities continued to grow and his head became more enlarged and much more heavier. He died on the 11th of April 1890 while sleeping at the age of 27. At around 3 p.m, Frederick Treves' house surgeon visited Joseph's rooms and found him lying dead in the bed. His body was formally identified by his uncle Charles Merrick. An inquest was held on the 27th of April by Win Edwin Baxter, who had gained notoriety conducting the inquest into the Jack the Ripper murders of 1888. Here's an announcement in the Stamford Mercury, 18th of April 1890, announcing the death of Joseph Carey Merrick, death of the Elephant Man. Pause this to read if you'd like to. Joseph Merrick's death was ruled as accidental, and the certified cause of death was asphyxia, resulting from the weight of his head as he lay down. After performing an autopsy, Treves determined that Joseph had died of a dislocated neck, which likely severed his vertebral arteries. Knowing that Joseph had always slept sitting upright out of necessity, Treves concluded that he must have made the experiment, attempting to sleep lying down like normal people. And we saw the photo of Joseph's last lie down, which was an extract from the film of The Elephant Man, and it was never spoken of or broached upon the subject at the time whether it was just an experiment to lay down like normal people, or whether he'd just had enough and chose to lie down knowing that he would never wake back up again. What we have to remember at the time, in 1890, is that suicide was a criminal offence. If you didn't succeed, you would go to prison for it. And in some eras, suicide would gain you social stigma and in much earlier eras as well, would deny you a Christian burial. Treves took plaster casts of Joseph's head and limbs and dissected the body, taking skin samples and mounting the skeleton. Joseph received a funeral at the chapel within the Royal London Hospital, and his soft tissue was buried in the City of London cemetery, except for the skin samples, which were later lost during the Second World War. The skeleton is still included in the pathology collection at the Royal London Hospital in Whitechapel, which merged with the Medical College of St Bartholomew's Hospital in 1995 to form the School of Medicine and Dentistry at London's Queen Mary's University. Joseph Merrick's mounted skeleton is not on public display, and his skeletal remains kept under lock and key in a glass case in a private room at the university, and can be viewed by medical students and professionals by appointment only, to allow medical students to view and understand the physical deformities resulting from Joseph Merrick's condition. Ever since Joseph Merrick's days as a novelty exhibit on the Whitechapel Road, his condition has remained a source of curiosity and mystery for the medical world. After hearing Treves' description of Joseph Merrick and viewing photographs, Henry Radcliffe Crocker proposed that Joseph's condition might be a combination of pachydermatocele and an unnamed bone deformity, all caused by changes to the nervous system. In 1909, dermatologist Frederick Parkes Weber wrote an article in the British Medical Journal of Dermatology and cited Joseph as an example of von Recklinghausen's disease, neurofibromatosis. In a 1986 article in the British Medical Journal, Michael Cohen and J.A.R. Tibbles put forward the hypothesis that Joseph had Proteus syndrome, a very rare congenital disorder. In a letter to the Biologist in June 2001, British teacher and chartered biologist Paul Spiring speculated that Joseph might have had a combination of Proteus syndrome and neurofibromatosis. During 2002, genealogical research for a film led to a BBC appeal to trace Joseph Merrick's maternal family line, bearing in mind that Joseph's mother's maiden name was Potterton. In response to this appeal, a Leicester resident named Pat Selby was discovered to be the granddaughter of Joseph's uncle George Potterton. A research team took DNA samples from Selby and an unsuccessful attempt to diagnose Joseph's condition. During 2003, filmmakers commissioned further diagnostic tests using DNA from Joseph Merrick's hair and bone, but the results of these tests proved inconclusive. Therefore, the precise cause of Joseph Merrick's medical condition remains a mystery to this day. And that is the life, end, and the mysterious circumstances of Joseph Merrick's medical condition. And what led me into putting this series together, and as I promised I would show you, is the burial entry for Joseph Merrick. And he is burial 219846, and he was buried on April the 24th, 1890. Joseph Merrick. The residence was the London Hospital, aged 28, was actually aged 27. And what led Jo Vigor Mangovin into her research and to find this burial and to be able to locate Joseph's grave. And the clinching fact that told her and the rest of the world that it was definitely him, of course, was Joseph's name, that he'd died at the London hospital, and that also W.E. Baxter, coroner for London, Win Edwin Baxter, is mentioned here. His body came from the parish of St Mary's. He's in plot 322, in grave 80103, and he received a second-class common interment. The interment ceremony was performed by N. Dunscombe, and that's the burial entry for Joseph Carey Merrick. And let's show our last respects in a nicer way than looking at those awful images we've just seen of him, shall we? And as stated, I wanted to pay our respects in a nicer, more fitting way to Joseph Merrick than looking at pictures of him and his unfortunate deformities when he was alive, or pictures of his skeleton. So on that line, I bought this bouquet for him, and we're going to place this there now. And that is a remembrance and very much a God bless you and may you rest in peace to Joseph Carey Merrick. Now let's end the video off on a slightly lighter note than graves and images of Joseph as he was and as his skeleton is. So we'll end off with something very fitting and very poignant, to which you will hear the words of Joseph Carey Merrick himself. So join me for that now as we say goodbye. What you're looking at here is one of those modern facial reconstruction jobbies, and with the wonders of modern technology, the experts were able to remove the unfortunate afflictions of the medical condition that poor Joseph suffered from, to give us a representation of what he likely would have looked like without that medical condition. So I wanted to end off with the face of Joseph Merrick, the man, and not the medical condition. And I'd also like to end with these words written by Joseph himself, with a very beautiful, very meaningful and poignant little poem. And he would often sign off at the end of his letters with this: "'Tis true my form is something odd, but blaming me is blaming God. Could I create myself anew, I would not fail in pleasing you. If I could reach from pole to pole, or grasp the ocean with a span, I would be measured by the soul. The mind's the standard of the man." What a mind and what a man, eh? I hope you've all found the series interesting, and let's end with looking at Joseph's face, and with very much a God bless you and may you rest in peace, Joseph Carey Merrick.